Hello, everybody. Welcome to Boswell's virtual event series. It is day 4,248 of us being in business. I'm Daniel, the proprietor of Boswell, and we are very honored to welcome back. While Boswell has not hosted Rick Bragg, he has actually come to Milwaukee for the former store that we are in the space of, Harry W. Schwartz Bookshops, as well as maybe next chapter. We're not really sure about that, but definitely Harry W. Schwartz. Rick Bragg is the author of 8 books, including the best-selling Ava's Man and All Over But the Chowden. He won a Pulitzer Prize for his writing in the New York Times and is a regular contributor to Garden and Gun, which is the source of some of these essays tonight, Where I Come From, Stories from the Deep South. We are very honored and grateful for Bragg to be in conversation with Boswell's very good friend, the principal of Midwest Media, the author support services organization based in Chicago. And Bill Young is the principal and longtime author supporter, I should say. And also good friend of Rick Bragg. So thank you very much, both of you. And let's give him a big hand virtually.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And thank everybody for being here. Rick, I've known you since 1999 with All Over But the Shouting and Shoutin', and the other family autobiographical memoirs, and just recently talked to you about your book about your mother, the best cook in the world. But I've driven around the Midwest and seen you in the South, and there's a question I've never asked you. When did you start writing?
Well, I guess this just shows how damn old I am, because I don't know. I think I could tell a story. I could sit on the front porch and tell a story when I was 9 or 10, because I grew up with these great liars, these great front porch storytellers and liars, and they'd get a little drunk and they'd talk all day, and so I could tell a story. I don't think I thought about writing anything beyond homework until I was in high school.
But you got to a newspaper fairly quickly.
Right.
You started at a local newspaper and ended up all the way to the New York Times. But where did you start? I think it was the Jacksonville paper.
Yeah, the Jacksonville, Alabama News. They paid me $50 a week, which was more than enough money then for me to get myself killed. And I wrote the sports column, and it remains about the best job I ever had. In the spring, I go sit in the press box and watch baseball games at the local college, and I thought that this writing thing was pretty easy back then. It was pretty easy, but I knew that if I could ever figure out how to transfer that good storytelling that my people did to a newspaper story or a magazine story, then I'd probably find a way to make a living, even a book. It took me a long time to figure that out.
Well, but you did, and you went all the way to New York, and you won the Pulitzer with the New York Times, and you also were at Harvard, the Nieman Fellowship. And when I think of you, I know you so well, but I sort of stumble over this word. You were actually Professor Rick Bragg at the University of Alabama.
Yeah. Well, I guess they've lowered their standards. I didn't have a lot of academics. I quit. I went to Jacksonville State University, and which is in my hometown. And if it had not been in my hometown, I probably wouldn't have gone. I did pick and shovel work up to up to that point. And uh, I went to college for a year and a half. No, not a year and a half, a semester and a half. And I know because when they, at a little ceremony a few years ago, they gave me my transcript of my academic career at the college, and it had a F and an incomplete. So
We're kindred. We're kindred
right,
spirits.
right, yeah. I was not but I didn't have a lot of academics, and but when I was in my early 30s, I got a Nieman Fellowship at Harvard University. I think I was filling their white trash quotient, and so I went there a year, and when I finished up, we'd had about 6 or 7 books out, and had some good luck with those, and when I quit newspapers, I never really thought of myself as Professor Bragg, but
you have students, you have people aspiring, you have people aspiring to be where you are now. And what advice do you give to students to approach the subjects that you write about that are compiled in this book?
Well, I just tell young people, young writers, that if you're going to write and you're going to be successful at it, then you need to follow one old piece of journalism boilerplate. And it doesn't matter if they want to be a novelist or if they want to be a nonfiction writer. It's that old show me, don't tell me. That old, Chekhov, and believe me, I don't quote Chekhov very much, but he used to say, don't tell me the moon is shining. He'd say, show me the glint of moonlight on broken glass. Wow. And that rule carried me through my career before I ever even heard it.
So you avoided school or read Chekhov.
Yeah. Show me, don't tell me.
In terms of show me, you returned to Alabama after a career, and I just want to give people a flavor of your writing in this book. And this book is a collection of mostly columns from Southern Living, and I got my first issue today.
Yeah.
Garden and Gun magazine. And if you haven't heard of Garden and Gun, it is a treasure. It is a magazine I didn't know until I interviewed you for.
Bill, are you the last person in America to discover Garden and Gun?
I'm the last person in America, so
that's why we're friends.
We are friends. Would you read the part about home? And we'll start there because I'm going to go off in different directions.
Sure.
When we get into the subjects of the book. So It's why I write about home on page 122.
Sure. I write about home so I can be certain that someone will. It is not much more complicated than that. Home for me has always been as much a matter of class as location. My home is not the comfortable South, not the big churches, or the country clubs, or the giant waterfront houses on the lakes, or the column mansions on the main drags. Home for me is not a skybox at Alabama or Auburn, or good seats at Turner Field in Atlanta. It is not even the Kiwanis Club or the Rotarians. Home is not a thing of position or standing. My home is where the working people are, where you still see a Torino every now and then, and people still use motor oil to kill the mange on their dogs. It is where the men live who know how to it is where the men live who know how to fix their own damn water pump, where the women watch their soap operas on an ancient VCR because they'll be at work at midday. It is where the churches are small and the houses too. It's where people cheer for a college they have never seen. where propane tanks shine silver outside mobile homes and redwood decks, where buttercups burst up from mounds of red mud encircled by an old tire. These are not the people of influence who have their names carved into concrete of banks and schools and churches, whose faces stare back from the society page. As I've said, maybe too many times, these are the descendants of people who only get their names in the newspaper, the history books, if they knock some rich guy off his horse.
It's beautiful writing. And most of the book is rooted to where you are now, Jacksonville and the rest of the state of Alabama. But there's another part, and it's a sweeping book about the South. And the other polarity in your life, the yin to the yang, is the city of New Orleans.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
How did you get there?
Oh, I always had a fascination with New Orleans. The old men used to talk about going to New Orleans and they put a $20 bill in their sock because they knew that they needed in the drunk tank, so they could get home. And I first time I went to New Orleans, I was a young man, and I never have been much of a hard drinker because men in my family drink too much and then they do something that they mightily regret that usually winds up with like fines and courts. And so I'm not one of those people that go to New Orleans to chug down some hurricanes and stagger down Bourbon Street. I love the architecture. I love the beautiful old houses made from steamboat timbers, and I love the music. If you've ever seen a young woman named Rosie Leday play an accordion in a place called the Rockin' Bowl, which is a combination music hall and bowling alley in New Orleans on a Thursday night. And of course, I love the food, which you and I have shared.
Part
there.
of some of the restaurants are in the book, Upper Line, and
yeah. And I love the idea that the standard for a sandwich in New Orleans is if you hold it up over your head, does the gravy run down your arm? I mean, if you can't appreciate a New Orleans po' boy, I have serious doubts about your ability to walk around on this earth. So, I just love the city, and I've always loved the city. Lived there in my 40s, and love everything about it. Doesn't
how
bother
often
me.
do you get back?
I get back every chance. But until the pandemic, I would get there seemed like every 3 months or so. I don't need much of an excuse. If somebody with the book festival calls and says, would you like to come to New Orleans? By the time the words are out of their mouth, the phone is dangling by its cord on the wall, and I'm already on my way. I've had some unfortunate moments there, like most people have. But there's nothing about it, even in the dead of summer when it's 114 degrees. And I'd rather go there and sit and sweat than be someplace precious.
There's a lot of entries in the book about that. One of my favorite is about it's the Columns Hotel, and you're meeting a friend there in the bar on the first floor, and it's just out of control. It's just a bunch of people after work, the young executive types, just making all sorts of noise, and it's just awful. And you talk your way upstairs where you're supposed to be a guest before you get on this balcony. And it's this transformation. It's one of these like a vision test where you look at an image and it's one of two things, and after you pick one, you could eventually see the other. and you go up on the balcony and it's transformed. Now you're looking out over St. Charles Avenue. It's streetcars, it's elms, and it's just a beautiful writing about that. And I guess a question about the entries in the book too. You are just observant as you go through life. These are obviously walking upstairs at the Column Hotel is not immediately in your head an entry in the book. And you're now writing for two publications on deadline. How do you select the parts of your life that end up as one of these short stories?
Oh, I think it's just the things that I think I mentioned before that I think nostalgia is not just a warm and fuzzy thing. I think nostalgia is a power. Now, some people use nostalgia to hide meanness and to rewrite the past, but to me, nostalgia has always been a retreat. And in these awful times we're in now, I think it's a real sanctuary. And so what I have, I used to write about awful things. I wrote about killing and dying, and I worked in Pakistan after 9/11, and I covered killing and dying in Haiti, and I've written about poverty and crime and the things that grind people down. But lately, I have done mostly softer things, and I guess I got too old to run and duck. I guess, and too old to run, too fat to duck. I guess, but I think the power of remembering a moment that the reason it works is not because you've managed to transport people. It's because you've kind of picked open a little hole in their own memory, and they read into it. Their balcony might have been in Savannah. Their balcony might have been in Charleston or Knoxville or Mobile, or it might have been in Milwaukee. It might have been in Chicago. And that moment of when the air smells like, bourbon and orange slices and candied cherries and perfume and you're sitting in a wicker chair that probably isn't long for this earth. It creaks under your weight, and you look out into the live oak trees, and there's a strand of pearls. They call them pearls. It's just cheap beads from a Mardi Gras parade. But the last Mardi Gras parade passed months ago. But those strands of beads.
Yeah, well, actually, that's in the story too.
Yeah,
there's
they'll
a strand hanging from the tree.
Yeah, and where else on earth do you sit in the branches of a tree almost and watch pearls dangle from the trees? And I guess that's the little bit of romantic in me, but I'd like to point out that I was not drunk when I noticed all this yet. And I think these moments of nostalgia are you just remind something of something that they've lived, and they'll walk up to you at a book signing and say, "You stole my story. You stole my story. How'd you know? How'd you know I was thinking that way? How'd you know I was feeling that way? How'd you know?"
When we post these events with you, the comments are almost universal. They come down on Facebook, and it's all, I love Rick Bragg. I love his writing. And it's that attachment. It's not even so much subject matter as the accessibility to these people that you give them.
I hope that's true. I think that look, if you write about being 10 years old and putting a lime green Tupperware bowl on your head and pretending to be a spaceman or pretended to be Spartacus, I'm pretty sure I wasn't the first 10-year-old who ever did that. If you write about getting a hook caught in your finger on the very first good fish you catch, I'm pretty sure, and you scream like someone's killing you, I'm pretty sure that wasn't the first time that ever happened either.
Well, another thing that you'll find in the book is as you get older, we're both getting curmudgeonly, is your opinions about things.
Yeah.
The people who drive pickup trucks or various hotel buffets. But what I'd like to read is your opinion of country music, and it's on. We talked about this. It's page 69 of the book.
Yeah, now let me point out there's a difference between country music and new country music. Old country music, Jimmy Rogers, Hank Williams, on up into Merle Haggard, and even on up into Waylon Jennings. Patsy Cline was touched by angels, so I love country music. I love the country rock of the Allman Brothers and Leonard Skinner, and cause it's got blues and soul in it. It's got touches of rhythm and blues and all that. But man, new country, that's a different animal.
Well, tell us about it.
All right. People tell me I am too negative, that the modern world fits me like a thrift store suit. I tell them to shut up. I do not know when precisely I turned the corner from hopeful open-mindedness and slammed headfirst into the dead end where curmudgeons go to die. But I'm pretty sure I was trying to find a decent country music station on the radio when it happened. I blame modern country music for all my miseries. I do not blame George Jones, who really did go to the liquor store on a riding lawnmower. I do not blame Patsy Cline, who was touched by God, and certainly not Hank Williams, who may have been touched by something different, but sang the pain of my people so beautifully that they could bear this life one more day. I do not blame Waylon Jennings or Johnny Cash or Freddie Fender, who promised, his voice a quiver, to be there before the next teardrop falls. I do not blame Merle Haggard, Mexicali Rose, the Wichita lineman, or the year that Clayton Delaney died. I do not, at least not very much, blame the day Mama socked it to the Harper Valley PTA, or Porter Wagner, who had more unnecessary stuff on his suit than a Shriner's hat. And I certainly do not blame the boys from Fort Payne, the group Alabama, who sang the Southern story. Papa got a job with the TVA. He bought a washing machine and then a Chevrolet.
Amen.
You just don't hear much poetry in modern country music.
No.
You get the feeling that the people singing modern country music never had to go searching through the parking lot of the Piggly Wiggly after their girlfriend threw their class ring across it in 1976. You just don't get that feeling from these guys.
Staying on a musical theme, after a lifetime of writing about the neighborhood, the small people, the ordinary lives, the unacknowledged lives, you get a call from New York to work with Jerry Lee Lewis.
Yeah.
And this is again, one of those double images where this is Rick Bragg, known for this, who's never approached anything like this. And what struck me, and I want you to tell some stories about with him, but you found a way to make him like the rest of us, except he started large,
Right.
and you brought him down to a normal person, and you elevate other people. But what was your initial reaction to Jerry Lee Lewis?
Well, people always love to say there ain't another one of fill in the blank, but I found that sometimes we're not all that unique. But Jerry Lee, there is not another Jerry Lee. I showed up at his ranch out in Nesbitt, Mississippi, and he came walking into the room in a pair of pajama bottoms with little pianos embroidered on them, and he sat down and he just started talking about his second wife, Jane. And he was talking about how they would have fights when they were first married, and they'd have fist fights, and he'd say, yeah, she could hit like a man. But the worst she ever hurt me was knocked me down the stairs one time, hit me in the head with her Santa Claus figurines. She collected Santa Claus figurines, and she would sidearm them at him whenever they'd have a fight. And then he'd say, yeah, I ain't never fought anybody that could fight like Jane. And then he pointed to the floor and said, ain't that right, Jane? And I thought for a minute that one of us had lost our mind. And I kept looking around I knew Jane was dead, and I kept looking around, and he was talking to a mountain lion rug under his piano that he had named Jane. So through the conversation, he would just periodically look down and go, ain't that right, Jane? And the mountain lion would just grin back at me. And he would tell me stories about making Elvis cry. The story of when Elvis thought Jerry Lee had supplanted him as the king of rock and roll. That's a real thing. When he married his 13-year-old cousin and he fell from grace, instead of giving up, he loaded 2 Cadillacs with musicians, drum sets, and guitars, and went on the road. Went to places like Milwaukee, Iowa, and Indiana, and played in places where the air smelled like evening in Paris jug perfume, and where some drunk invariably would say, hey, you the guy that married your 13-year-old cousin? And he would invite them up to the stage. And when they would put a foot on the stage and look up at him, he would bust them in the face with the butt end of the microphone. And we talked about some awful things. I mean, he lived with death and violence, and rock stars have always, quite frankly, have bored me to tears once they start talking about how many drugs they can do and how many pills they can take and how much whiskey they can drink. It's an inevitable track. But Jerry Lee did it with an incredible gothic flair.
Oh, and indeed. I mean, if you went the famous picture, the 1957 photo of the $1 Million Quartet with Carl Perkins, Elvis, and Johnny Cash, the morning line wouldn't have Jerry Lee Lewis as being the survivor of into the year 2020.
Yeah, it kind of rides in his mind every day. I think Jerry Lee, his obit's been written for 40 years, and his he almost died on operating tables. He's just I wrote in a story once about him, and I think it's in this book, that if Jerry Lee can still be here, then surely we'll all live forever.
Well, indeed. I mean, you were worried about if he'd be alive at the publication of the book. Instead, he was touring the United States with Bruce Springsteen as a backup singer, and ended up in Europe touring Europe when the book came out.
He did a gig at BB King's big nightclub in Manhattan, and he's sitting there, and he's getting ready to do a whole lot of shaking going on, and he stops, and this place is so packed you can't even move your elbows. And he turned around and he said, because I wasn't sure that this was necessarily a book that he was fond of.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, and he turned around and said, "Rick, this is for you." And then he launched into this whole lot of shaking going on, and he tore it up for a little while. People being unkind like to say that it sounds more like a waltz now but that's not true. He tore it up for a little while. His piano playing was still perfect, and he likes to call people that he is fond of by his nickname. It's a kind of a strange thing, but he'll do it with children or people that he likes, and he'll when the book was done, and I had to do these interviews mostly while he was in the bed, and I walked up, closed my notebook, shook his hand, and said, "I'll try to write a good book about this." And he just shook my hand and said, "I know you will, killer." And
and what did he say when it came out?
Yeah, I think he liked it. We did several, not several. We did some book events around the country. Did one in New York. Did some others, and one he didn't show up to because he's Jerry Lee, and I think that his legend has been told and retold, and so many times that Jerry Lee just knows that he's the only one who will ever really know, no matter what we do, no matter, I'd like to think I'm a pretty good interviewer, but there are dark and deep places in Jerry Lee's soul that we'll never get at. I was just proud to be along for the ride.
Well, indeed. I mean, it's an honor to be the one, but you've never done anything like that. You did a book with Jessica Lynch, but not to the extent.
Right, and Jesse that was probably the first time I'd ever tried to write in detail about anyone who was not family. And she was very brave and very kind, and had to suffer through an awful lot. And when I went to interview her, she was still in terrible pain, broken from her skull to her toes, steel rods holding some of her limbs in place, and she had the courage to talk about what happened to her, and I'll never forget that. And had a tremendous responsibility to try to tell it, because her story would not be told a million times.
Yeah, and it was current events. I mean,
Right. It was off the news. And we had to do it in such a rush because it was off the news. And, the I don't want to say the American public, but any public, the attention span of a tick on a hot rock, you got to get it out and get it done. But I'm an old newspaper guy, so I can do that stuff, I guess.
What are you doing day to day right now?
Well, since
It's a pandemic, you're probably doing what we're all doing.
Yeah, I wrote 2 books, not just since the pandemic, but over the past 2 years. And this one we put together hoping, I should say, that it would be not an antidote, but it would be a little bit of a balm in a bad time, hoping that it would be that. But I had already begun work when we started putting this together on a book I've always wanted to do. Every Southern writer, and I know how you feel about these creatures, but every Southern writer, I believe, since the beginning, has wanted to do a dog book.
Oh, good.
Except, of course, for cat people who, have no soul.
Well, you've met my dogs.
Right. Well, you've had, at least 2 of the best dogs I've ever known. I've always wanted to do a dog book. And I guess I could have picked any of the good boys that I've known in my life. But about 3 years ago, I found a illegitimate Australian Shepherd. He's not completely Australian Shepherd. His daddy, I think, was a traveling man. But he was just this beautiful Australian Shepherd, starving to death on a ridgeline behind our house. And we live, in 40 acres of mountain pasture, so it's pretty, not wild, but it's pretty wild. And he'd just gone up there to die. He'd been torn up in dog fights. He'd been a pack dog, and he was tore all to pieces and starved to death. And I brought him home and fed him, and he was my dog from that moment on. But he was a bad dog. He was a terrible dog. But I discovered something. I'm not, and I'm not one of those people who sits around and talks about whines about being down or being low. I don't have time to be down. I don't have time to be low. But a lot of us are, and Larry McMurtry said this better than I've ever heard anybody call it, that some people are just born beside a river of melancholy. We have moments where we get down. We have days where we get down. And if you're down a little bit, you need a good dog. But if you're down a lot, you need a bad dog. You need a dog that can rip up a day, that can just tear a day to pieces, that can have you running, screaming at the top of your lungs, trying to retrieve. My dog once took 3 kittens for a ride in a sack. He herded them into a feed sack, picked it up and took them for a ride. He attacks. We have like 1,000-pound mule. He attacks the livestock. So sometimes you need a bad dog. So I wrote 200 or 300 pages on the worst dog I know. He just happens to live right outside the door.
You're going to go from the best cook to the worst dog.
Worst dog I've ever seen. I mean, it's the worst dog I've ever seen that wasn't like, trained to kill.
Well, you have. There's one in the book though that you had that lasted a number of years that died.
Yeah, I have not actually had a dog of my own for years, for decades, because I was on the road. I lived in 20 cities in 25 years, it seemed like. But yeah, we had a hound here on the farm that was a intelligent, beautiful dog. But she was so intelligent and so independent that you didn't own her. Nobody owned her. She was her own dog. And she was a great dog. And I wrote about losing that dog. And probably one of the single saddest things I have ever put my thoughts to.
I didn't want you to read that for that reason.
Yeah, it was really hard. But my dog Speck had just gotten here when she passed, and it was. But sometimes you need to write about the death of a good dog for the same reason you write about the death of a good person. They deserve a eulogy.
Well, you do that in the book, and one of what I love about your work, and it is both heartbreaking and hilarious at the same time.
Well,
Thinking about your remembrance of Pat Conroy. When you Pat Conroy.
Conroy was, it's easy to say he was a mentor because he was just good to me. He wrote me probably the most eloquent book blurb in the history of all time. And he saw something in the writing that he liked, and he became a champion of that. But he was a champion for a lot of people. But he had this irritating habit of he'd call you up and leave you a message, hoping that he wouldn't get you so that he could leave this message. And he'd say, "Bragg, this is Conroy. It's up to me to keep this dying friendship alive, because obviously you're not concerned about it. Ours could have been a father-son relationship, but you spurned me to go hang out with those intellectual Yankees in New York." Well, I did not. And I mean, you can just tell by looking at me, I'm like an intellectual Yankee waiting to happen. And I ain't never gone searching for the perfect bistro. I that's not my thing. But he would like just keep on and on and on and on, laying it on thick about how guilty I should feel about not calling him every day. Because when I do call him, you just get that answering machine that says the answering machine is full and cannot take your message. And then he'd call me back the next day and do the same thing all over again. But when we would talk, whether in person or on the phone, we talk about writing and we talk about family. And he would always end by saying, "I love you, son." And that always sounded real to me. And
I met him briefly a couple times in Chicago on book tour and felt the same way about him. He's just a wonderful man, just immediately accessible and warm.
if you've ever heard him read out loud, as you have,
I did. Yeah.
It'll make, I've heard all the time, and I guess it's a compliment. People would say, they would say something really kind about the writing, and they would always say, well, it made me not want to write. And that's a wonderful compliment to receive. It was kind of bullshit, but it was a wonderful compliment to receive. But Pat Conroy could make you feel that way. He could read out loud from his work and make you think, my God, at the elegant nature of that language.
I like the line where after your family had met him, you became the second favorite author in the household.
Yeah, my mama's favorite book for a long time was The Water is Wide. And I'm actually her third favorite writer, come to think of it. So
who's second?
She really loved when Louis Grizzard was writing about family. When he got older, and he started, writing about politics and the nature of the world, Lewis could be a little mean. But when he was writing about family, when he was writing about his own mama, there was beauty in what he was writing. And my mama, liked that. But yeah, Conroy was the only author to ever come and visit her and bring her half a German chocolate cake. And I never asked Conroy, what happened to the other half. I assume he ate it. But yeah, I may be down to fourth or fifth on the list by now. It's hard to say.
And you have two remembrances of Harper Lee in the book. You met Harper Lee, and then there's like an ode to Mockingbird on there.
Yeah, I didn't. I was, sometimes your mind gets a little cloudy at this age, and I was greatly surprised to find there were two odes to Harper Lee in there, but I guess that's all right. But, Harper Lee wrote a sermon for our time, I think. And she wrapped it in this beautiful story so that you could consume it, like putting a little honey and lemon in a bottle of whiskey to help cure the croup. She was the writer that we all wanted to approach, but I never did because I didn't want to be one more writer lined up to touch the hem of her garment. And I almost waited too late.
No, you didn't meet her, but
yeah, I almost waited too late. But I was honored to see her, and she was always kind to me. She would send a book, a signed book, to if I was talking nearby, close by. And
well, they're beautiful entries in the book, both the remembrance of meeting her and also the appreciation of To Kill a Mockingbird. We've got a few minutes left, and I wanted to go back to food. And like the country music, I would like you to talk about, we talked about breakfast and what's wrong with breakfast in hotels.
Everything
It's words that you could share with us. On page 76.
I can try to.
Yeah, there's a short passage, but I want to use that to lead into my last question.
Sure.
The
I
second
had an
paragraph.
the abominable biscuit, I think, is the one.
Yeah, the third paragraph where it says the rest of us will blame it.
All right. The rest of it we will blame on the hotel breakfast buffet. And this is all about how I have become even more of a crotchety relic. But
yeah, I'm sorry. Maybe you should have read the first part. But
all right.
Anyway.
I'll go. I am a crotchety relic. If you ask me how I'm doing, I will respond fine, but it's early. It may not be my fault completely. Part of it is age. I used to go to the drugstore and buy a Hershey bar and a yo-yo. Now I go in the drugstore and buy drugs. You're unlikely to skip down the sidewalk clutching a 3-month supply of metformin and a quart bottle of amlodipine. And reading glasses. I'm always losing my reading glasses. The rest of it we will blame on the hotel breakfast buffet, the nightmarish 21st century phenomenon dishonestly referred to as a hot bar. I think that is where I turned the corner from optimist and went stumbling off down the path to miserable old geezer. I believe somewhere between the desiccated bacon and scrambled eggs so awful there is no known word, I just lost hope. Yeah, there's nothing worse than a.
Well, I want to go that. The last question I'll ask you, speaking of food, and we've done a lot of traveling together, including Milwaukee, where probably
Yeah.
most of the audience is from. Just know that Rick has been on Ballesteri's Pizza on Blue Mound for pizza 1 a.m. and Benji's Deli and Cops Custard. And but if I get in the car right now and pick you up at noon tomorrow, where are we going for lunch?
Oh man. Well, I'll do what I always do. I'll just say, Bill, because our tastes and physiques run exactly the same. I remember one trip. Well, first off, we would always manage to find some place with cheese curds. You
Yeah.
know, fried cheese. Whoever thought that up, I'm for. You know, I want to be their new best friend. But I'll never forget one trip to the glorious part of the country that you roam around, stalk, and we. I don't remember where it was, but it was, you know, after midnight. Seemed like, and we went to a place and got a sausage sandwich, sausage, onions, and peppers. That was roughly the same size as a downflow pipe from your septic system.
Well, I did a couple of those. We had Rick and Beans breaded steak, but we also
Right.
did the outdoor Polish sausage on Maxwell Street.
That's the one That's
Yeah,
one
we
I'm
stand at the
referring to.
counter outdoors.
And I apologize because it kept spilling out onto my shirt and of course the seat. And I'm sure that several pieces of it got down between the seats, which you informed me that was okay because that was not the first time it happened.
Believe me, I was once profiled and said he always eats in places that end with the name Y''S.
It's yeah,
It was like Flukies, Wolfies.
right. But how do you not love a part of the country? How do you not love?
Well, I think that I have a deep appreciation where you're from and you me, and I love the regional differences, and I don't know where they begin and end, but they're very distinct. The parameters of the South and the parameters of the Midwest. I think they share that in common. And then once you get to the particulars, the food and the living within, a lot of it determined by weather as well. They're very similar, and I love the South.
That may be true, but I had to go up to Chicago and Milwaukee and other points north to consume a breaded piece of pounded out steak.
Oh, it looked like a mud flap on a semi.
That was the size of a cavalry saddle.
Well, because we were together and dared each other, we got the large.
Yeah, but it was as large. It was. I have seen people drape blankets over their knees that were smaller than this. But I always think of, and I am a Southerner born and bred, but I've lived in LA, I've lived in New York, I lived in Miami to Boston to you name it. But I never got to live up there. I never got to live up there.
That's too bad. Well,
and I always kind of regretted it. And after eating with you, I really regretted it. But I know I would have died. I mean, I just would have died. And because I'm not as tough as you are inside.
No, you are. Believe me. I was in New Orleans with you.
Yeah, I think I would have perished up there. I think I would have been sitting in a parking lot with 2 cheeseburgers and an order of onion rings sprinkled with cheese curds. I think that'd just been the end of me.
Well, it's a good way to go. Let's do it again someday.
Yeah.
I want to just, we're about at the end here, but we have a couple of people that have asked questions or made comments.
Sure.
And this is from Nancy, and she says, I'm from the South, but living in New England. So I love hearing you read from your book. Is it available in audio?
Yes. Oh, yeah, I do them all. And I do them all. I think they're thinking that there are a lot of Southern accents and a lot of actors who can do a Southern accent. but I have that unique a mix of kind of pool hall Southern and hillbilly accent that they kind of have to let me do it. So I've read just about all my books on audio, and
So this one will be available then, is available?
oh yeah, yeah.
Good. Okay. And then Christy writes, no question, but I have to say that Rick's stories are like Southern finest herbs. Somebody else's, one of these, a panel just came up and obscured the question. Or like Chris finds a poetic mixture of poignancy and playfulness. In addition to his books, I look forward to reading the last page of Southern Living every month. Amen.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah.
And now that I've found Garden and Gun, I feel the same way. Although it came today, and who's on the back page is Roy Blunt, who I also like, but I was hoping to.
Yeah, Roy did a great column about growing a beard. Just only Roy Blunt could write
the pandemic beard.
Yeah, no, it was actually before the pandemic beard. I always had a beard, and I had the pandemic shave. I got so bored that I started shaving, to discover that there was a pasty-faced, decrepit, aging old white man underneath all that beard. And I used to be a lot of things. I've never claimed to be much to look at, but I never was pasty before. But I have now moved on into pasty. I'm just pasty. I'm a pasty man. There ain't anywhere around it.
There's a question with David. We'll wrap it up then. So did your family support Big Jim Folsom? And what did you think of the George Wallace movie starring Gary Sinise as Wallace and Joe Don Baker as Folsom?
Yeah. My family did like Big Jim because Big Jim was unapologetic. Big Jim was a populist, but he was a populist without the evil rancor and without the Big Jim tried to do right. Then Wallace came in and Wallace kind of stroked I've said that he stroked the racism here like a mean cat, so yeah, they were big fans of Big Jim Folsom, but some of them too were Wallace people. I remember seeing a lot, at a family reunion, seeing quite a few Wallace stickers on the bumpers of cars. But the movie that they're referring to was, Joe Don Baker is one of those. Only in rural Alabama could you say that Joe Don Baker is an truly iconic actor, because Walking Tall still holds the record for showings at all our movie theaters. Walking Tall showed more times, more nights. I probably saw it 32 times myself, but I thought he did a good job as Big Jim, larger than life. Someone asked Big Jim once if it was true that he took this money from one fund and moved it to another, and his answer was, I did. I poured the damn concrete that you're standing on. So yeah, we have no shortage of those type people down here, those larger than life figures.
Well, thank you. Thank you again. And Daniel, I just want to make sure the book is available from Boswell Books. Somebody else said I could listen to see Rick Bragg all day. I've never listened to an audio book. I might be tempted now.
Super grateful to Rick Bragg and to Bill Young for this wonderful event, and of course to all of you who came to watch, because we wouldn't have a virtual bookstore without you. And we'll look forward to more of Rick Bragg, and we'll see how big we can get the sandwiches if you ever come back. So we will still have cheese curds. So Thank you both. Have a wonderful evening, and thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thank you.